This week on Empowering Midlife Wellness, I'm talking again about creatine, which is a fascinating supplement that we traditionally think of in the context of bodybuilding. Now, it is really good for growing muscle, but even more exciting, it's also really great for brain health and bone health. So this is something that is particularly relevant, especially to women in midlife. Hi friends, and welcome to this week's episode. I'm Dr. Susan, and if you're just joining me, I'm a board-certified gynecologist and certified menopause practitioner dedicated 100% to taking care of women in midlife. That's women like me who want to feel great now and also do everything we can to build the healthiest elderly version of ourselves. And of course, that starts with what we do right now. So today I'm going to talk a little bit more about this amazing supplement called creatine. Now, I've talked about it before, but I'm going to add a few more details today because we are learning more and more about how it is so beneficial, and I'm going to say just about for everybody, not only for muscle conservation and muscle building, but also for bone health and even more exciting for brain health. So you can see why this is particularly relevant to people in midlife, especially women in midlife, because this is a time where we're worried about those things. We are naturally losing muscle. There's a process called anabolic resistance that's so frustrating, but it does actually make it more difficult for us to build muscle. Not to mention, cognitive decline is something that I would say is the number one thing that my patients are concerned about as we get older, and bone loss that leads to osteoporosis, falling, breaking bones. So creatine is something that has benefits in all of those fields. So it is something worth understanding really well. Now, you know, I believe that you should get everything you can from food, and I take very few supplements. I honestly believe that we can get everything from food, but this is perhaps one exception because to get enough creatine from food would be almost impossible. Creatine is a naturally occurring substance. We make it in our own body. It's simply a chain of 3 amino acids. I'll talk to you about that in a moment. But to get enough to provide the benefit that we're going to talk about today, you would have to eat beef and liver, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then still it would be difficult. So this might be one of the few supplements we're taking supraphysiologic doses. That means doses that are higher than you could get from food or higher than we make in our own body does have proven benefits. So let's just go back to basics. What is creatine? I mentioned it is a short chain of 3 amino acids. Some people say it's an amino acid. That is not actually correct. It's technically a peptide because a peptide is a short chain of amino acids. In this case, it is arginine, methionine, and glycine in a short chain. Of course, those are naturally occurring substances that are found in food, as I mentioned, but you need a lot of it to get to the levels that we're going to talk about in a moment. We also make it in our own body. The primary source where we make it is our liver, but we make it in other places as well. Well, let's just say that typically if we eat meat, not everyone does, but if we have an omnivore or carnivore diet and we're making it in our body, we might be exposed to something like 1 gram a day. I'm making up very round numbers, but something in that order. What we're talking about here is 5 grams a day or even 10 grams a day, depending on the size of the person. So much more than you could get in your diet. Here's an interesting fact. Creatine is the most studied supplement, more than vitamin D, more than vitamin B12, more even than omega-3s. There are over 500 studies on creatine. The good news about that is almost universally, they have shown that creatine is not only safe, but has a very low side effect profile and a very high benefit for most people. So, again, this is one of the things that we could think about being important to take for just about everyone in midlife. So, going back to basics, what have we mostly heard about creatine? So, when I ask about creatine, most people will think about bodybuilders, and it's been in the bodybuilding space for decades because taking large doses of creatine has been shown to assist with building muscle. Now, if you lift weights and take creatine, studies have shown you will build more muscle than if you lift weights alone. Also, if you just take creatine and sit on the couch, you will build more muscle than if you sit on the couch and don't take creatine. So that suggests that creatine is actually helpful at building muscle. And like I said, with more than 500 studies, I think we can be very safe in saying that that is the case. How does it work? Well, it does have amino acids that are literally the food for our muscles, but more than that, it stimulates these amazing substances that muscle makes that are called myokines that have various different functions, and one of them is in accelerating muscle growth. It also helps with muscle hydration, which is important for making your muscles look bigger, but it actually makes muscle function better. So out of these hundreds of studies, they've encompassed just about every field of exercise physiology, and I mean not just weightlifting. So we're talking about muscle volume or the size of your muscles, but also strength is improved because those are different. You can have lots of muscle that's not very strong and vice versa. So strength and volume of muscle are not equal, although they are aligned in some cases, but also sports like swimming, cycling, jumping, running fast, just about everything in exercise physiology has been studied in the context of creatine. And the way that it works is that creatine is stored in our muscle in the form of creatine phosphate or phosphocreatine, and that is a primary substrate that is used to convert into ATP. Now, most of us know ATP is the primary energy currency that we use to create energy. So if we are fully loaded with phosphocreatine in our muscle, it does help us with short bursts of activity because we can create ATP efficiently. Now, it doesn't help for endurance exercises. So if you're running a marathon or doing a 6-hour hike, that's not the primary mechanism that we're going to be using to generate ATP. But it's been studied in the context of short bursts of activity, like lifting a weight, jumping, sprinting, etc. So you can see why it's helpful in the realm of exercise physiology, not just for making us look good in a swimsuit, but that's helpful, but also for increasing our strength and creating energy for those very short bursts of movement. So creatine phosphate is loaded in the muscle, and it does take some time. Now, we'll talk about how we take creatine, but it takes about 30 days to build it up in the muscle, and then it would be important to take it regularly to keep that fully loaded creatine phosphate state in the muscle and in the brain. And I'll talk to you about the importance of the brain in a few minutes. So if you chose to take creatine, the reason why might be to help with muscle conservation, because as I mentioned, we're all losing muscle as we age, and sarcopenia, or significant loss of muscle, is related to so many disease processes. Now, we can imagine, of course, is associated with bone loss because muscles pull on bone, and that's one of the primary ways that we keep our bone turning over in a healthy manner. Balance. Now, when you're 55, you might not be thinking about falling being a major problem that you're going to face later in life, but falls are a major cause of disability and death as we get older, so we want great balance. And then we'll be talking about the muscle-brain connection in a moment, but having more muscle is associated with a decrease in dementia, including Alzheimer's, which my patients say is the number one thing they don't want to get. If I survey 100 patients, 95 of them will say their primary fear is Alzheimer's, and I will put myself in that group as well. So anything we can do to reduce neurologic decline, especially dementia, we would be wise to do so and start it now. So we've talked about taking creatine for the purpose of building muscle and the reasons why that's a good thing for lots of reasons, also for strength, for quickness, for energy. But let's switch a little bit, because I think perhaps even more exciting is what we know now about creatine's effect on our brain. Now, the more we know about medicine, the more we learn that everything is connected, right? That we're not little silos of a knee and a brain and a breast. Everything is connected. And muscles produce myokines that I already mentioned that signal the brain to do a lot of very healthy activities. So one of those pathways, and there are many, but this one's very exciting, is that some of these myokines, you might have heard of, say, interleukin-1, for example, and there are lots of other ones, stimulate the brain to produce this particular substance called BDNF. Now, you might have heard of BDNF. It's brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Also has been studied hundreds of times and in lots of ongoing research because it is not only neuroprotective, that means it protects the brain from the natural aging process, but it's neurogenerative. If we have a brain injury or just the normal process of breakdown of cells that happens with aging, BDNF helps it to heal more quickly. So BDNF not only helps when we injure our brain, like with a traumatic injury, for example, but just with the day-to-day decline of brain cells that leads to memory loss, cognitive decline. Now, perhaps not Alzheimer's, but just that can't remember the word, slowing down of quickness of thinking, mild cognitive impairment, or just everyday forgetfulness is improved when BDNF is higher. And one of the primary ways to increase BDNF is with exercise, particularly with strength training, and creatine has been shown to accelerate that process. So very exciting that, yes, exercise and resistance training on their own do increase BDNF, and that's fantastic. So let's please all do that. But adding creatine seems to help more than exercise alone. So if we could add something that's so harmless and so natural that could improve our muscle, our strength, our quickness, our memory, reducing dementia, wouldn't that be great? And I'm telling you that we can potentially do that with creatine. Now, I mentioned bone health, and let's not forget about that, because another thing I really don't want to do is develop osteoporosis, fall down, break a hip. Interesting statistics you might have already heard. If you break your hip and you're over 70, approximately 1/3 of women will die within the first year. Once we become immobilized, we can lose 2 to 3 pounds of skeletal muscle in a week. So very, very quickly, you can imagine if you've broken your hip, now you're an elderly person who's immobilized, it's very hard to come back from that. It's very hard. So what we want to do is prevent that from ever happening. Now, if it does happen, we certainly want to have a lot of extra muscle in order to give us some resilience to be able to recover from that natural loss. So going into our later decades, it's critical to not have just barely enough muscle. We want to have extra, and you might have heard many speakers and authors mentioning this analogy. I like it a lot. It's like your retirement fund. You don't want to go into your 70s with no money or, God forbid, being in debt. We need a little extra because we're going to need to use it. We're going to be losing it as we get older. So everyone in our 50s and 60s should have extra muscle. So again, anything that we can do to increase our muscle, let's do it. So yes, that's resistance training, and in the context of this video, creatine helps. So if we're thinking about taking creatine, how do we do it? What's the dosing? What's the best product? Well, creatine is generally manufactured in the form of creatine monohydrate. It's a tasteless powder. It's not difficult to manufacture. It's quite inexpensive. So this is one thing where I will tell you it doesn't particularly matter what brand you choose. I bought it at the grocery store before, but I personally take the Thorne creatine monohydrate product just because I like Thorne products. It's not expensive. It comes in a little tub. 1 scoop, which is 5 grams, would be the typical dose that we would start an average-sized woman on. Now, keep in mind, it's been studied in doses up to 30 grams a day without harm. So there's a lot of leeway in what dose you might take. But most studies have been done on 5 grams a day, so that's a very safe place to start. Frequently we say if you're a very small woman, like under 120 pounds, you might even start on half of that and then move up. If you're over 160 pounds or so, you might even double it and take 10 grams, just to say, because remember, it is simply 3 amino acids, naturally occurring substance. You can take a bunch and you won't get in trouble, but up to 30 grams has been studied. Now, still happens. I won't say it's the old way to do it, but certainly one way to take creatine was to do an initial loading dose for the first week, like take a very high dose for a week and then go down to the 5 grams daily. Generally, I just say take 5 grams daily, and we know that it takes about 30 days to get to a steady state where the muscle and brain is fully loaded with creatine phosphate. So yes, if you start taking 5 grams a day, you're not going to reach the full benefit for 30 days. But the reason why I'm not a big fan of doing that high loading dose for a week, now that would get you there quicker, but there is a subset of patients who complains about water retention. So I'm going to talk about this because almost every patient that I talk to says, well, doesn't it make you gain weight? Here's what it does. It does draw water into the muscle. So it hydrates our muscle. Now, some people like that because it makes your muscles look bigger. It's just water. But muscles should be well hydrated to function well. So that's a healthy thing. But you might see that you gain 2 pounds on the scale. It's not fat, it's either water if it's in the first couple of weeks, or it may even be muscle if it's beyond that, because again, it does help to gain muscle. So that's just on the list of reasons why you should not weigh yourself on the scale. Do body composition periodically, but who cares if you gain 2 pounds of water? Now, we're not talking about water weight around the middle or water in your feet or that type of edema or swelling. It simply causes the muscles to hold more water, which is not a bad thing. I have personally not found that to be the case myself. Most of my patients don't find it at all, but just because women are so very terrified of gaining weight, I will mention that is something that people talk about. And they probably talk about it more than they need to because it's not that common of a symptom. It doesn't happen to everyone, and when it does, it's very little. So water weight being the main potential complaint, that's why I don't like that loading dose. So I would just start with 5 grams a day. Now, people argue about when you should take it. There's a camp that says you should take it before you work out, a camp that says take it afterwards. Doesn't seem to make any difference. What we want you to do is take it every day. So anytime that you will remember, pick the time of day that's easiest for you to remember. For me, that's first thing in the morning while I have my cup of coffee. So if there's something you do every day, like brushing your teeth or drinking a cup of coffee, put it there. It'll just remind you to do it. My particular habit is to have a scoop of creatine, 5 grams of creatine monohydrate in some water. It's tasteless. I mix it and do a little shot. You can put it in your coffee. Again, it's tasteless. Now, there is an argument I've heard that the caffeine eliminates some of the absorption of creatine, but studies on that particular topic are with very high doses of caffeine because the acidity in the caffeine could potentially offset absorption. A regular cup of coffee isn't going to make any difference, so if that's the way you prefer to take it, by all means do so, or you can just do it by itself. Doesn't seem to matter what time of the day, doesn't matter if you've eaten or you haven't, just do it when you can remember. Now, you might hear some people say creatine causes hair loss, and that is not true. That is based on one single study that was never duplicated, suggesting that creatine might increase this particular hormone called dihydrotestosterone. So there was a theory that maybe creatine increased hair loss. Well, keep in mind, a lot of the initial studies on creatine were done on bodybuilders who were taking masses of testosterone and anabolic steroids and all kinds of other things. So it all got kind of muddied in there. But creatine by itself does not cause hair loss. It doesn't. Remember, it's 3 amino acids. It's naturally occurring. There's no mechanism by which it could do that. So that is not true. Don't have to worry about hair loss. So really, for women, the only thing that I would not even worry about, but just be aware can happen in a small subset of patients, is a small amount of muscle water retention. And that's a pretty good price to pay considering all of the other potential benefits. So one other note, if you are vegan, creatine monohydrate is vegetarian, no animal products in the powder, even though in nature it is found in an animal source. Double check with your manufacturer, but certainly the Thorne product, and I don't know of any creatine monohydrate products that would have any animal products in them, no gelatin or anything of that nature, so it's safe for those on a plant-based diet. In fact, that might be something to even consider more highly on a plant-based diet because you're not getting any in your nutrition. It is an animal product when it's found in nature, so safe for vegetarians. There are very few patients who would not be safe to take it. If we take a lot, it is passed through our body in the form of different substance called creatinine, so don't get those confused. Creatinine is passed through in our kidneys, so if you took a whole bunch, it would come out through your kidneys and you would generally be safe. Has not been associated with kidney problems, liver failure, any of the other things that people sometimes discuss. So we don't need to worry about it in that respect. Now, one thing that I've had a couple of patients mention is it caused some GI upset, so stomach upset, cramps. I'm just going to say maybe 1 to 5% of patients might notice that. If you notice that, and that's hard to explain, but everybody's different, I would simply drop down to a lower dose. So if you started on 5 grams, I might drop down to 2.5 grams. I mean, it's just common sense. Again, naturally occurring substance, it's just 3 amino acids. If for some reason the common dose bothered you, just go down to a lower dose. We're still going to get some benefit even at a lower dose. So all in all, this is a really fascinating substance. One of the very few things that has a massively well-studied safety profile, like I said, over 500 studies, not only in the exercise physiology world, which is undeniably very beneficial in that space, but I'm really excited about the benefits for the brain, because we don't just store creatine phosphate in our muscle, we also store it in our brain. Now, converting creatine phosphate to ATP in your brain is a really great thing. We want to have brain energy. And again, going back to memory, cognition, substances like BDNF that are actually neuroprotective. This is very exciting. So we know certain things are neuroprotective, like estrogen, exercise, creatine, BDNF. All of these we can get in the same way by taking safe doses of menopausal hormone therapy, exercising, lifting weights, and now taking creatine. I think for almost every patient, we're going to be recommending that. I certainly take it myself. And then as these years go on, we're going to learn more and more, I think, about the various benefits for protecting our brain long term. You know, these studies would take 30 years, so I'm 57 now. When I'm 87, we'll be able to see whether somebody who took it like me and somebody who didn't have different outcomes. But when we're looking at outcomes that are very long term, what we want to do is be sensible and take something safe. Even though we don't have 30-year studies yet in the terms of brain health, we certainly have them in exercise physiology, we know there's no downside. And I do not want to wait to be 87 to find out that I should have taken it when I was 57. So that's my suggestion regarding creatine. So 5 grams would be a good starting dose. Any form of creatine monohydrate, which is the way it's usually sold, and don't just sit on the couch, because it works dramatically better if you do resistance training along with it, as well as aerobic exercise. So all goes back to exercise, estrogen, and creatine. So I hope you learned something today. If you did, please share it with your friends and subscribe. I can't wait to see you next week.